another project, a refret. So that's a pretty cool project. It's an old Gibson 70s 345 or something like that. But frets are pretty beat and old. I mean, it could have been done with we could have got a fret dress on it and recrowned, but they're pretty flat and low and square. Um, so he just said, let's just make it right again. I'm going to do a whole refret on it. There's a little bit of a funkiness to the neck that I'm going to have to plane out a little bit. I don't know if we can see it. Yeah, kind of hard to see, but it's not too much. But so after I pull the frets, I'm going to have to get a bar on it and level the whole board before I refret it. What is it? It's a ES 347 Gibson. All right, let's get to work. All right, so got this kind of taped off around here, but no big deal. I'm going to start pulling these frets, and so I have fret poolers that I made. Now you can just get a couple, a cheap pair of these little end nippers. Oh, it's not very focused. But you have to dress these guys really sharp. So kind of use a grinding wheel a lot of times, and then take a file or whatever and like sharpen those points nice and flat, nice and sharp, because you need to get this underneath the fret and pull it out. And sometimes also usually before I do this, because they get kind of beat up, the edges get beat up, I take a little, file like I did on the top surface, and then inside take a little round needle file. Sorry if you can see that. And kind of sharpen the edge of that thing just a little bit, so because that's where it's going to go under the fret. And the cleaner you get it, the better. So, yeah, I mean, you can buy fret puller tools, obviously, that are ground down, but I mean, this is a cheapo thing that I had forever. Basically, what I do on it is I'll start with the first fret, or down here at the end, and I just try to get just the very end of that fret. So I'm just using the very end of this tool just to get the very tip of the fret lifted up. And it just depends on the guitar. Sometimes they pop up pretty easy, sometimes they need a little work. You don't heat the frets or anything like that. There might be a little old glue in there when they put them in, but it's nothing crazy that, so basically you just want to lift them as easily as possible, and you want to use the tool. So as I clamp this together, I push that together, and that lifts the fret up. I don't want to wiggle it, yank at it, or do anything weird like that. I want to actually push this surface down onto the wood as I, as I clamp them together, and squeezing them together is what lifts the fret, and then I keep pressure down on the wood because I want to hold the wood in place while I bring the fret out, just to minimize any kind of chippage or from the fretboard wood-wise. These are like, all I'm doing is barely pushing down, squeezing together, coming across very quickly, or not quickly, slowly, and then these are just falling out. So no big deal. These got really small tangs on them. I got some fret wire that's very close to the kind of wide, low Gibson wire. And if I get any chips in my slot, I can use a little super glue and just zap them in place while I'm down here, or while I'm working on per fret. And if I lose it or whatever, I got a thing of sawdust, rosewood dust, ebony dust, and some super glue, and I'll just fill it. And by the time I go down the board, if I got chips, I'll end up having all these little spots of super glue and sawdust and stuff as I went down. But since I gotta, knock this whole board down with a leveling bar after I'm done, just to get everything good and flat before I put the new frets in, it'll be a little bit of a mess before I do that, but that's fine. You can go ahead and make a mess like that with the super glue. But these are just coming out really easy, so I just want to, again, I don't want to, if you have to go all the way across and you have to go back across, you know, to kind of get it lifted evenly out, just go ahead and do that. Push down as you crimp, and it will lift that fret. Boink. And these are coming out nice and easy, and they're pretty loose, so I'm not getting a whole lot of chippage. So pushing down, squeezing together, pushing down, squeezing together, holding the wood in place. These are coming off really easy. Sometimes you got to worry about right here where these inlays are. That little bit of wood between the slot and the inlay will chip out on you because there's not much there. But you know, usually we fill it, if you got to fill it with super glue and sawdust, once you get it all sanded down and buffed out, you pretty much never see it again. Especially on ebony, it pretty much disappears. But so if I have to kind of go back the other direction and keep squeezing and pushing, then that's what I'll do. So, I don't know if you can see that very well. Sorry about that. So I got all the frets pulled. So no more frets in our fretboard. I got a few chips, especially up in here, one right here at the 12th fret where the wood in between the slot and the pearl popped out on me. It just depends on the cut of the wood of the fretboard, it seems like. The more flat sawn the grain, the more it wants to chip, and the chips get longer and longer, the flatter it is. And the more quarter sawn the grain of the cut of the wood on your fretboard is, the least amount of chips you get. Seems like that's how it works. So I get, you know, my super glue, and I got a paper plate where I do my little puddle of glue and get a little screwdriver. If you got an applicator or something like that you're comfortable with your glue bottle, that's fine, of course. So I do have some chips right here. And what I do with them is I put a little drop of super glue in them first. I mean, these kind of flew away. I couldn't really, a lot of times, it's hard to save them sometimes. Usually end up 90% of the time doing this and filling it. And then I just grab a pinch of rosewood dust. This is ebony, but the rosewood dust basically turns black with the super glue. But I mean, you can kind of wait till you do a little bit of planing on the board. Obviously, then that'll create dust, and then you got the exact same dust as the board. So I kind of do that, and then I'll drop and then sprinkle, and then go back and drop again and sprinkle again, just to get things up above the original surface. So it's not a bad idea sometimes to just paint the edges of the fret slot with some super glue. So you might go in there, and I might go down. It depends on what's happening, but sometimes things kind of, you know, you get a little grain that lifts. It doesn't come completely out, but you know, plus that kind of tightens up the slot a little bit for the new fret tang that's going to go in there. All right, so I kind of did all that. I kind of painted all the slots with some super glue and filled anything I needed to fill. So you can see they're all kind of mucked up, but that's all right, because I'm going to go over it all, of course, now with a leveling bar, and you know, basically treat it the same as like you're doing a fret dress, you know. So I got a long bar here with some heavier duty sandpaper on it than with frets. So I got, like, I don't know what this is, like 80 or 100 grit on one side, and then like 120 or 150 on the other side. So I'll treat that as if I'm doing a fret level. Kind of the same rules apply, keeping the bar perfectly parallel with the path of the strings, not taking off the corner or anything like that, and rolling it over with that nice and sharp. And then, you know, what you could do is use a radius gauge, check the radius of it. So I can use this, I want to get it, you know, straight flat from one end of the board to the other, maintaining the radius as best as possible. And then I'll come back over it. I might use a smaller, shorter block like that with some lighter sandpaper, work up to like 220. And then I can use a radius gauge, an actual radius block, just to make sure that the radius side to side is where it should be in original. Or if, you know, there might be a situation where when you're doing a refret, where you're changing the radius of the board. That's one reason people want to do a refret, because they don't like the radius on their fretboard. So I will go over it with this guy, this big long guy that covers the whole board. And, you know, adjust your truss rod, get the neck straight as possible, just like you're doing a fret dress. Put a clamp down on the end of the body just to hold everything in place, and then I'll make sure I get it straight from end to end, and then I'll start cleaning it up and make sure the radius is good. If I'm missing the middle, I can tighten the rod a little bit and bring that up. I mean, if you have a long neck or kind of a, you know, flimsy neck, and this can work on fret dressing too. I can take a block and I put a piece of leather on it or something, and I can kind of support the center of the neck a little bit. Keep it from bowing down as I work on it, because you gotta use a little more pressure doing this than you do with kind of the fret leveling, so. Kind of keeps it. Now I'm getting all that super glue and sawdust and all my fills off. As expected, things are hitting pretty good down here and up here, and the middle's kind of, might have to tighten the rod a hair. Pretty tight on that rod, just to bring that center up a little bit. Now we're hitting a little more. So again, just like frets, I don't want to roll over the corner. I want to treat the radius as if it's continuing out past the board, you know, so don't roll the corner. You want that edge to be nice and sharp when you do your fret, so that the fret sits down. If you got a little bit of a round corner, that fret's gonna float out over it, and you're gonna end up with a little gap under the fret. So I want that corner of that binding to be nice and sharp. Kind of working on it here, getting down to the lighter side of my bar. So yeah, I'm hitting down here at the end pretty good. Like I figured, they lip up usually. Hitting everything, so you can see there's some kind of flat spots in between the fret slots. I mean, if I kind of miss something in between the fret slots a little bit, I'm not too worried about it. You know, as long as I've hit where the frets are going to go in. This is a good time too, if you got some extra chips that you missed when you pulled them out. I mean, you got all this dust on here, so I get a little puddle of super glue in my screwdriver, and you can just fill those things in, and you can take a little dust from what you're working on there and kind of just give a little fill while you're working. I mean, you got to take it down anyway, so. So I can grit up. I'm going to use my smaller block now. I got some 220 grit. Just make sure that when you put your paper on there that I kind of bend it around the block and take it off the block and give it a good crease, just so it fits nice and tight. I get a nice flat surface there to work with. And now I can just kind of continue leveling it, but I can start polishing up the wood and the pearl and all that stuff. But I don't need the whole bar now, because I got a pretty level thing. Of course, you can always, as you're leveling it, get your steel straight edge out and test it. And just make sure, again, keeping it parallel with your string paths. Now I can start
polishing it up, and get some 220 and get all these scratches out.
So I just kind of start with the bar, go shorter, and then end up with my block. And then I'll go back to this with some really light sandpaper, 400 grit, 600 grit, and get it. Basically what I'll do is I'll go up to about 220, 400, maybe 320 grit, and then I'll start working on my slots. I need to clean them all. I need to make sure that they're deep enough, because if I'm taking off a lot of material, then my slots are getting shallower. So I might need to deepen them a bit for the new frets. Clean them all out and get them ready for frets. And then I can come back with some much lighter sandpaper, 400, 600, and polish everything before I actually install the fret. So I'm working with a radius block, 10-inch radius block. I just wrapped a piece of 220 grit sandpaper, the one I was using on my block, which I switch back and forth. But I just want to make sure, you know, I'm not doing too much work at this point. I just want to make sure I'm hitting everything side to side now. Not trying to work on the flatness of it end to end, or the straightness of it. So as long as I didn't get too crazy with the bar, it stayed pretty much the same as it is. So I kind of got up 220 here. I flip back and forth between the radius and my short block, quote unquote short. But kind of finish up with the block, the length, the long block, whichever, or the radius, whichever, but pretty much got it up to 220. So, all right, so basically I got my board down to 220. I'm gonna buff it out higher than that. And, you know, so it's all straight. My radius is done. Like I said, up to 220 grit. Any little things I needed to fill, I filled as I went there. Any chips that popped. Of course, you know, especially with all this pearl, you know, especially with the pearl on here that you're sanding, especially the higher the grit you go, wearing a mask is highly recommended. Pearl dust is pretty noxious. A little rosewood may not kill you, but anyway, as usual. So as far as the slots are clean, it now depends, you know, sometimes in the factory, the slots are pretty deep. They're well deeper than, much deeper than what your, you know, depth of the tang is gonna be on your wire, which is a good thing. And you definitely want it at least that deep, if not deeper. I go a little deeper if I need to. Now in areas where, maybe down here at the end, where I hit it pretty good, you know, obviously the more you sand down here, the shallower your slots get. So I might have to go in there and, you know, I'll make sure, but I might have to cut these down a little bit deeper. Now this is a Stumac tool. It's a fret slot cleaner cutter, and the reason they, you know, they have these two blades and the kerf is going in opposite direction, so that you can get in there and work on it, you know, in between the binding. And I can kind of pull, and, you know, after I did all the filling, you know, some of the chips, and got some super glue down on the ends. My binding was coming loose here a little bit on this guitar, and I had to kind of super glue all the binding back in nice and tight. So I just want to make sure everything's, you know, solid as I work my way through all this. So, but I want to make sure I go in there and definitely get my slots cleaned and check the depth. Now I can kind of take this saw and I can take my wire that I'm going to be using, and you'll get, you know, the tang depth on different wires is, you know, there's a measurement when you order it that they vary. This is pretty standard, but I can kind of see where the depth is, and I can even take a razor blade, which I've done before, and give myself a little score mark on my blade here to kind of let me know where my line is, so I can check the depth with the blade itself. Or sometimes what we do is take a piece, an extra scrap of your wire, and file off the barbs that are on the tang, the little triangular things. I'm sorry if you can't see that. Yeah, now you can kind of see them. Just get those off of there so that it fits down in your slot nice and easily, you know, it doesn't stick. And you can just take a little piece of wire and check your depth. say I could do it with this old wire. Where is my thing? So I could cut it, I could bend it like this, and I could take a small file, perhaps, if I can find them, and I could file those barbs off of the tang, just so I have just the tang itself, minus the barbs. I can do that on both sides. That way I can take it as a depth gauge and I can drop it in and make sure that my wire goes all the way down and my crown sits nice and flush on the top. So I just want to go in here and make sure everything's cleaned out. And then what I'm going to do, after I go down the whole board and just check my depth and make a little depth gauge or whatever and make sure that, you just don't want the tang holding you up when we're hammering them in or pressing them in. If it's, you want all the crowns, of course, to sit flush with the top of the board. So if they're not deep enough, obviously your fret wire isn't going to go in all the way. And then I'm going to go with a Dremel tool, and StewMac makes these, where they make this little bitty bit. I don't know if you can see it. It's like a dental bit, and it's slightly tapered. So the deeper I set it, the wider it'll cut the thing, and it gives the slot a little bit of a V cut to it, which is nice. What's good is, if you use that tool, get it all cleaned, and then use this little dental bit fret slot cleaner tool. And we used to use dental bits straight up back in the day, but then StewMac makes them. I think you can get a set of 5 of them, and they're pretty cheap and well worth it, because that way you get all your slots exactly the same. When you're trying to mess with everything by hand, one can be a little wider, one can be a little narrower, but you want all your wire to go in consistently. And then what I'll do is I'll even take a little triangular needle file, and I'll kind of take the corner off the edge of that top of the slot, and that'll help the wire just kind of fit in a little cleaner, a little quicker. It won't want to teeter, and because the wire's kind of soft, and if it hits a spot and you're hammering them in, and all of a sudden the tang just doesn't want to go in any deeper, and then all of a sudden your crown and your fret wire can teeter over on the tang, and it'll look tight on one side and it'll be lifted up on the other because it'll be kind of crooked. So I take a triangular file after I do my Dremel, even before, it doesn't matter one way or the other, and I just kind of take that top corner off of the slot, and it helps that wire at least start going in nice and straight. And sometimes I'll even take a piece of 220 grit paper or something. I kind of work at it where I get the slots to fit my wire. So I might, take a little piece of sandpaper, fold it over, and just ever so slightly open up the slots just a little bit. But I'll keep checking. It's good to have that. I can take my wire, I can put it in a slot, and I can try to just push it in with my thumb. And basically where I want it to go is, if I can get the tang like a little over halfway in with just thumb pressure, but I can't get it all the way in, where it's going to need a hammer or a press to get it in the rest of the way. That's kind of what I'm looking for as far as my slot, the size of my slot. So yeah, I'm going to go down through all this, and I can show you here real quick as far as this guy goes. If I plug her in, basically all you have to do is put this down in the slot, and then just the bit will follow the slot if you just pull on it and go back and forth. So I might want to go a little deeper because it didn't really do much. So you don't want to cut the depth with this thing. Use a saw or something to get your depth. But you use this to kind of, like I said, it kind of creates a little bit of a V'd slot. think I got all my slots cleaned up. The depth is good. Boy, it just kept chipping and chipping and chipping on me. Every time I touch this thing, it seems like a chip of wood comes out. So hopefully that's all done, and I've got them all filled back in. So now I'm just kind of going with shorter block even, and with some 400 grit. So I just want to clean and kind of polish and do a final, pretty much a final. I can go over with some 600 too. And you know, as far as 400 grit, 600 grit, it's not going to change the radius or anything like that unless I really go at it. But I want to get all the tops of this binding cleaned up. It gets pretty scratchy with even the 220 grit and stuff. Gets pretty scratched up, and really with plastic binding, you almost got to get it up to like 600 grit before it's nice and smooth and stops looking like it's scratchy and holding ebony dust and all that stuff. So I just want to go over this and polish the rest of it out. And like I said, I might do some 600 grit over it too. If I use 600, I might just use my Blockbuster with some 600 grit on it, just as a polisher. Because it should be straight and everything like that at this point of the game. So I'm getting pretty close. And I will start putting in frets pretty soon. We'll do that. I may open the ones over the body a little bit wider just so they fit in, so I don't have to just bash the crap out of them with a hammer. And that's something people do on acoustics, on the tongue over the body. A lot of people will fill like these sandbags in there to absorb the shock of a hammer, but not to give your top too much pressure. Some people open them up so wide that basically the fret just drops in almost, and then glue and clamp with you can use a radius gauge or a radius block or something like that, and glue them in and clamp them down with a clamp and just hold them in with glue. That way you're not just totally bashing with a hammer. Just on any regular fret job, you got to be aware that putting in all those frets, how tight they are, it's going to slowly kind of back bow that neck a little bit. So getting this up there, went over with some 600 grits, getting kind of shiny, looking good. I mean, this binding still stays pretty a little murky. So a good way to finish it off is with a file or ever handy file, and just take it down, or card scraper works really good. Just hitting the top of it, and you'll see it kind of turn white again. If I got a sharp edge, and that'll take a lot of all those scratches off of it from the sanding. All right, so I'm gonna get some fret wire bent for my fret job. Getting close, we're gonna go do and show you how I clean out the slots and everything, but I got the wire I want, which is this nice wide, low, kind of Gibson style wire. It's like 106 by 39 or something as far as the crown, so it's not a bad crown height, but very wide, as it's really close to what Gibson uses in a lot of their stuff. So so it's straight, and it comes in 2 foot lengths usually, and most fret jobs you're going to need 2 of these, 4 feet worth, if not a little more. So if you've got 22 frets, you might need like 1 more fret. 21 frets is 4 feet is usually fine, but with 22 you're right at the edge of it, and with 4 feet, so it's cheap enough that just buy extra lengths more than you need, because you might screw up a fret and need to cut a new one or whatever. So good to have at least 1 extra length of wire on hand for any reason why otherwise you're just getting it perfectly. Now this is of course a jig that I made myself with just some these nylon spacers that you can get at the hardware store, Ace. And I got this, I kind of made this little unit here where I can adjust the radius, but I just push it through. Got it in my vise here. You might be able to see that there's a little slot in that guy. That's where the tang runs through, and then just kind of holds it straight. I don't know if you can see that. Sorry if you can't. Anyway, so So yeah, I just kind of cut a little slot in there for the tang to run through. And then it's just going to go, under here, over there, and down into there. And you always want to over radius it compared to your board. So, because when you hammer it in or press it in or whatever, it will flatten out. So you want it extra radius so that the trick will be getting the ends to stay down, especially over binding. So we'll talk about that when we get to the installation. But so I kind of need to pre-bend it a little bit. So I take guys like this and I just grab my tang and just slowly, you don't want to kink it, but I just slowly bend, I don't know, a couple inches worth, just enough that I can get it fed through. I put it into here in my slot, down it goes, and I just push, and like magic, I just pull it through, and ta-da, we got us some radiused wire. So you can make one of these for a couple bucks, really. And then the other end, when it comes out, is a little straight too, so I kind of have to hand bend that end too, just a hair, but just be careful not to kink it. You just want to move it and slowly bend it to match the radius from your jig, and ta-da, we're good to go. All right, so I got my wire that we bent. Some tools. I got a fretting hammer, which is this brass hammer that I found, but you can get fretting hammers. They make those dead blow hammers, which are pretty cool. They have a brass tip and they're like filled with buckshot, so they don't bounce on you. They don't want to come back up. So that's one thing that's pretty important if you're hammering in frets. You want to have a really good solid bench. You don't want things bouncing because you'll get that reverberation or whatever. And so you want some people use like sandbags. They put a sandbag underneath the neck. That works pretty good. They make things like that, which do work very well. But just have a good bench or a good, I'm going to use a neck block and keep that block right under any fret that I'm going to be hammering in. You don't want to be, have the neck up on a block and then be hammering in the middle and bashing your guitar down. So just make sure you got good support right underneath where you're going. So as you can see, when we did our radius, it's over radius compared to the board just a little bit, which is what we want because we want to keep the ends down. And since we got the binding on here, we're going to have to kind of nip the tangs. Can you see this? I got too much light off of there. So what I do is I just kind of lay the fret wire across where the board here, where I'm gonna leave about a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch longer than on each side. And then with my nipper, you want to do it right with the tang, so square to the fret crown, and just nip it. Don't pull it or tug it or anything like that. Just cut it. And then these are kind of the fret tang nippers that you gotta kind of buy. And I think Philadelphia sells them, but they're usually kind of expensive. But they got this little guillotine guy that goes down. You can see that, sorry. So the fret goes in there, and this little guy comes down and chops it, and it cuts the tang in from the bottom of the crown. So I want that, I don't want it all the way right to the edge of that slot inside the binding. I want to leave it just a hair, maybe 32nd, 1/16 of an inch or something. But I want it as close to that binding as I can get, just because that's the only thing going to be holding down. So now that the fret without the tang here is going to be sitting on top of the binding, and there's really nothing holding it down. I'm going to put a little super glue in there and clamp it after I get them all in. But for the most part, that's it. I kind of keep a damp rag, and I keep a little bit of glue, a little bit of tight bond. Man, everything's so washed out. Which I just use it. I don't really rely on it for holding the fret in necessarily, but it does kind of grease it up a little bit so it slides in a little easier. So I just kind of tap it and give it a real slight caulking of glue on there. Get my hammer, put my guy in. Can you see where I'm at? So I kind of hammer across. I kind of want the whole fret to go down side to side. People have different techniques. They'll do from one end to the other, or I kind of go across the whole thing. I get my ends down flat first, and then the middle is, you know, halfway or so in. And then I take the middle down and hopefully take a good look at it. I can kind of push down on the ends just to see if they're bouncing up and down. That feels good, looks good, sounds good. You know, if it sounds, you know, if you're getting the same kind of solid sounds from one side to the other, I think that's good. I don't think that side's sticking up too much. That side looks good. So where the fret kind of hangs over the edge, you don't want to bend it or kink it over the edge. You want to, like everything else, you want to keep that radius continuing out past the board, and don't bend the fret, you know, over the corner. So I got another one that I cut. Do another nip. Sometimes you just have to kind of put it here and kind of judge how much tang you have to nip off of there. And if you have to re-nip it a little, that's fine. That was a little much, but it'll be okay. Again, just I give it just a dab on the very bottom, some tight bond. Put her in the slot. So they're going in tight. I have to hammer them down to get them tight, which means my slots are kind of where I want them to be. You know, you want that mechanical fit with the barb and the tang and everything holding them in like a plastic straight edge, and just kind of check it. Just kind of want to make sure that they're all going in the same way and they're basically level. I mean, they're going to be a little bumpy from hammering them in. Even if you use a press, they'll get a little bumpy. So I want to get this, you know, just parallel with the tang, and then nip, call it good. Put the fret down here, kind of judge. You can use those little barbs as a judge as how many little barbs do we gotta nip. Always push that in really tight against the cutter, so you get a nice flush cut on the bottom of under that tang there. That looks good. Maybe just a hair off. Sometimes the ends of those slots are not quite as deep. You get a little bit of a, sometimes they get, especially if you're doing a lot of filling and gluing and stuff. Again, I take just a hair of glue and give it a little, I mean, it'll help hold that in, but it's mostly like a grease kind of thing. And sometimes you get a little, put a lot of glue on it, you'll get a little squeeze out coming out from under the fret, which not a terrible thing. Just clean it off, but it will let you know that you're all the way down. Cool. So that looks good. And then now that I get 3 in, I can start kind of eyeballing it and making sure that I don't see one bumped up from the other. And You can use a straight edge or you can use a fret rocker, of course, as you're going, and just see if they're all basically equal. You might get a tiny little rock here and there, and you can kind of give it a little more of a hammer. But I mean, they're not going to be super perfect, but the goal is to get them all in as even as possible so that when you do come back later and do a fret dress, just level them, that you don't have to do too much, especially on these short wide frets. Not a lot of crown here, so I definitely don't want to take a bunch off. Let me give it a little more of a nip. Sometimes I have to just grab an extra little millimeter or something of it. So another thing that can do is, which I haven't done, is, so they make a tool. I made my own, of course, if I can get it out of my tool guy. Have a crimper. So if you can see that, where's my camera? You can see how the thing has like teeth. So if I put that, again, this is just a cheapo end nipper that I got. And I took a Dremel and I ground those little teeth in there so that, you know, sometimes, especially on this kind of thing, even on the ends, I'll give it a little bit of a crimp, and that kind of makes that tang a little wavy, which, you know, so it'll actually fit a little tighter in the slot. So if you got slots that are too wide, too sloppy, you know, StewMac makes a really nice one of these, but you can make your own with a Dremel cutter and one of these guys. But yeah, if you can make the tang a little wider that way, and that'll fit tighter. And sometimes it's not a bad idea, especially on bound fretboards, just at either end of the tang, right up against where it meets the binding, to give it a little bit of a crimp to make sure it holds nice and tight. Once you hammer it into the slot, the crimp kind of straightens back out, but it will hold a little tighter. Doom, go down. And sometimes you can do a little bit of a glancing blow, especially on the ends, instead of just banging up and down, especially if they're bouncing. I mean, if your fret is bouncing or it's just not tight enough or something's going on, you know, grab your fret pullers, pull it out, either crimp it or do something, kind of rework it, and then sometimes you have to bend the radius back in it a little bit, and then try it again if the fret's in pretty good shape. If you just, you know, kill a fret pulling it in and out, then that's why you have extra wire and you just cut a new fret. You know, it's not expensive stuff, so it's not worth trying to salvage something that's getting beat up. Better off just cutting a new fret and starting fresh. But sometimes if it doesn't go all the way down at the end, you might have to, you know, your slots may not be deep enough, so you might have to pull it and go, I need to rework my depth of the slots to make sure everything's cool again. So it's going all the way down. So, but we're getting there. There's 4 frets in, and they should look pretty even and shiny like that. And if you look down the neck, I don't see anything sticking up. All right, so got frets in. So now, basically, as you can see, they're sticking out pretty far. And I don't, you know, a lot of people will cut them at this point right away, nip them off with our end nippers and start to file them. But what I do is I will run down, and I think, and they're pretty level. I went across them with, you know, you can, like I said, you can use a fret rocker, and I don't know if you can see that very well. I don't have really good light on it. You use a fret rocker and just make sure, again, if you got any weirdo frets, this is the time to pull them and reset them or replace them. I'm gonna run some tape kind of underneath these guys because I'm gonna super glue the ends of these. I'm gonna go down all one side and super glue it. I'm gonna use my Lexan cove cut caul here, or you can use a radius block. And I'm gonna put them in my vise up sideways, and I'm going to go down one side, and I'm going to clamp and do like 4 or 5 frets at a time. Just give them a drop or two of super glue and clamp them in, maybe a little accelerator or clamp them for 15-20 seconds, and then just keep moving on down the line here. When I get up here to the end, I'm just going to have to use a clamp on it, and it won't fit into my vise. Say if this was not a bound fretboard and it was just rosewood or something, a lot of times what you'll have, especially if your fret's coming all the way out the end and your tang's coming out the end, you might have a slight gap underneath the tang where the slot was a little deeper than the tang. So that's where I kind of, when I do this, I'll use my rosewood dust or whatever, and then I'll make a mess. You know, I'll do a drop or two in there and sprinkle it with rosewood dust and get it in that hole underneath the tang, and also kind of build up around the fret itself, because sometimes when you're working on the fret slots and refretting, you'll get a chip right on that corner, and it'll kind of create a little gap under the fret, so when you file it in, it'll kind of mushroom and mush in. It'll kind of, since the frets are kind of soft, they'll kind of fill in that gap. And you can kind of tell a refret a lot of times because it'll look like that. You'll see the fret ends aren't super clean. You don't get a super clean profile of the end of the fret. All right, so I got it locked up in my vise here. I got to raise my vise up pretty high with some blocks to get it up, kind of, because this is a big body guitar. So yeah, like I said, I leave these things long. I don't nip them yet. I'll do all that after I'm done doing this. Because it's kind of nice to have this sticking out. It'll actually, you can use it kind of like a wick to put the drop of super glue on the end, and it'll wick down in there. You want to put a drop or so on each one, but I don't want super glue kind of running over the board or anything like that. Sometimes it does run down the edge of the fret a little bit, and then I'll just have to go in with a razor blade and kind of just scrape it clean again. So that's not a big deal, but this will kind of lock the ends down. I keep it a little bit loose to start with, just to get my call on there, and it's all sunny coming through so hopefully this looks okay. And then I will, as usual, have my, come on, if I can get it to stay put, my Puddle O super glue. Drop in with a little screwdriver. Oh, come on. I'll put it over here. I was hoping I could keep it there. So, you know, this stuff, you got a little bit of time to work with it, but 4 or 5 of these at a time is about as many as I can fit into my vise, at least. So I can get these good and just make sure I see it going under the fret and getting in there. Again, just a little bit. And after I do there 5 of them, get it down in the vise, clamp my vise. Like I said, if you had a radius block or something and just like a clamp, you could do it that way too. So I can get a little accelerator and I can just squirt them with the accelerator. After I get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 I did, and then I will unlock it, move it on down.
So I got it kind of loose sitting in there and super tighten it. So we got number 6, 7, 8, so there's this binding cracked in some spots on. Okay, I'm up to number 11 here. So I can bring this in a little bit more. Again, give it a good clamp. That should lock everything down. Hopefully it'll be fine. Squirt, 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 squirt. So now I can just take a jerky clamp like this with some pads on it, and I'll just clamp it in up here. So we'll do that, and then I'll flip this over, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. I just want to make sure to get everything. So I put this piece of tape on it just in case I don't run any super glue down the side of the neck. If you do get super glue, you know, on a shiny finish, you know, whatever you do, don't wipe it. If you get a drop of super glue on something, just let it sit and set up. And a lot of times you can just flick it off with your fingernail, and it'll just fly right off. As soon as you wipe it, then you are committed.
All right, continuing on with this guy. So I did glue down clamped and glued the treble side of the fret ends. Everything looks like it came out good. Things got a couple little runs that I'm gonna have to just take a little razor blade and hit, but for the most part, I think we're all good. So yeah, everything's still sticking out. So I'm gonna take some end nippers, flush cut them, so you can get these yourself if you want, and then you kind of grind them down so you get a pretty flush cut when you go into the side and nip it. Or of course you can get them from Stumac and everything, and they have some really nice ones that are flush cut like that and ground down, so that you get a nice close nip to the board, but it's going to be a little bit out. And we'll have to take a file, probably take this file and hit the fret ends in. So yep, I'm just going to run down one side, run down the other. So basically what I do is I just push it in as tight as I can, you know, basically 90 degrees to the board, squeeze, clip. You know, you don't want to twist or wiggle it or anything like that. You don't want to pull up on them for sure. Since as I said, it's always a fight to keep the fret ends down nice and tight onto the board. So if anything, I'm putting pressure down on my thumb and pushing down as I nip. And all these little nips that you get, just kind of keep track of them. Get a little pile of them, but they can wreak havoc on a guitar if you slide it across.
One of those little barbs. So that's why I leave all these long when I do the gluing, and especially if I do the, if I got just a rosewood board, no binding, and I'm kind of sprinkling rosewood dust as I glue the ends. Anyway, because you just have to clean it all off anyway, so you might as well make a mess prior to doing this. It's a little trickier up here over the body. Those little nubs out of the way. Go away, demon nubs. Now spin around. There's another nub. And I will do this end. You see me? I'm way down here.
Bring this back around. So now what I'm going to do is, so now they're, you know, flushed off pretty well. So there's still a little bit of a proud fret sticking out, which is fine, because we're going to take them in and grind them in with our file. I'm just going to do it, and what I do is I do it kind of the same. I do like a 90 degree through the board, maybe tilt it in just a hair until I flush. And if you've got, you know, again, since the tangs were nipped, we don't have the tangs sticking down below the crown of the fret. But if this were a standard kind of rosewood board or something with the tangs sticking out on the edge, of course you want to get that flush as well, obviously. So kind of start 90 degrees, and then when I get everything in flush there, and then I'll go for my bevel, which is usually, I don't know, 25, 30 degrees or something. Kind of depends on the guitar. I am going to do a nut on this guy too, because his nut was a little jinky. Somebody had put a bone nut on it, but it wasn't the greatest job. And a lot of times with fret jobs, you do have to either have to shim the nut because you're putting brand new fret wire in that's usually taller than the original where it was all worn down. I mean, sometimes you don't have to, but either you need to shim the original nut with a little piece of veneer and rework it if it's a nice piece of bone or something original, and you kind of want to keep the original look to it and everything, and there was nothing wrong with the nut, etc. This one, or you need to do a whole new nut with the job. So what I do sometimes is, I'll put it in my vise. I can turn this a little bit. But I'm just gonna kind of get it started. So, you know, when you're doing fret ends, you just, you know, you don't do one fret at a time. Obviously, you just want to lay your file across all of them. That keeps you away from the edge of the board until you're flush, and then you just start hitting a little bit. But once, and it's good if you know, if it sounds, you can always kind of hear a loose fret or something because it'll scream on you. But if I'm going down the frets and I get the same kind of sound coming from it, nice and solid. So as soon as that file, this single cut file, starts to float and just go, then I know I'm flush with the edge, and I don't want to, you know, keep digging on it. I've just gotten used to doing this, so I just kind of use my thumb as a depth gauge as I'm running across here. So once I get it flush, and up here, these are the guys that are, especially right next to this pickup. What I might do is use a smaller file on some of those upper frets. So I'm just going to continue on this. and then, you know, get these nice and flush down here, and then I'll flip it around and do the same on the other side. And then I'll start, once I get them flush, I'll start bringing them in a little bit. So I got them flushed out on both sides, you know, again, just kind of 90 degree, maybe a little bit in. And now I'm gonna take them in to the angle I want them. Since I'm putting a nut on here, you know, I can adjust that string spacing. So I can kind of work that after I'm doing this. But basically, you know, it's gonna be about a 30 degree bevel on it. So I take my kind of heavier file. Now I'm gonna actually angle those guys in. Let me see if I can see this more what I'm doing. Turn all this around. So yeah, there's my file. Is that worse? So I'm kind of in. Is that better? And I can kind of start, you know, with a little bit of a bevel, and then if I want to add a little more to it, I can. I just don't want to go too far too fast. Just down here on the, and I bring it into where I'm just hitting the top corner of that fretboard. Again, you'll feel the file float and give way, and I just try to keep that same angle. And what I want to do is I'm going to go, on the treble side, I go body to nut, because my cuts on my single cut file are kind of going this way, you know, as they move. So I want to go in that direction with the angle of the file facing forward up, and like this across, so that pushes my frets down. If you do it the other way, if you're kind of running it, you know, with the cuts going this way up, then it could lift the fret end. It could. So I'm always wanting to, you know, push down, 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 down. I take a look at them, and I just want to see that they're nice and square and tight, and flush with the binding, the edge of the board. And I'm going to kind of eyeball it too, and look down all those corners of my bevel. And you know, sometimes it's easy, especially in the middle, you might, you know, bevel them in a little farther, that kind of, and then back out and then in, and you get this kind of curved line on those. So I want to look down there and just make sure that it's a nice straight line all the way down the edge on the corners of the frets, which is looking good. All right, so one side there looks pretty good. And I like that angle. And I'm gonna flip it, and of course I'm gonna do the same on this side, but I'm gonna go from nut to body, because I want like I said, I want the angle of the cut to go like that, to push the frets down as I file. And it'll even, like, kind of, this metal's soft enough that it'll kind of even push and peel that metal down to fill any gaps or anything like that. So if you got the slightest little gap, it'll actually draw that metal down and kind of spread it towards the board. So I kind of went down and deburred this side. As far as crowning my ends, I mean, I just, you know, deburr them and stuff. I use this old crowning file they have. It works great. And I just kind of bring it in just till I grab kind of at the same angle of my bevel, maybe a little bit more, and I can just feel where that file grabs that corner and deburrs it. Of course, they have all kinds of fancy files for that kind of stuff too, like we had in class, where if I can find it, a square needle file. Come here, you. Oh, mess. It has to be at the bottom. Square needle file where I, you know, ground down one side to make a safety side so it doesn't have a cut to it. And that I can put down to the board. And you can just kind of come in, grab the corner, and just give it a little bit of a roll as you push. I usually go down one side of the fret all the way up, and then I go down the other side like that, come back, And you can get that little corner where the fret meets the board and knock that guy off of there. But, you know, I don't go crazy like trying to round them or crown them or anything. I just want to deburr them and get that sharp little edge taken off.
This file from one of my favorite files, had forever, and it just looks like a fret polisher to it. It's so beat up and old, and it has just enough work, and it leaves things really clean and shiny. As you keep working on stuff, you'll get a file that's like that too. Just kind of check it with my fingers and make sure that I put some pressure on there and rub my finger. You know, no blood. It must be doing it right. Again, I don't want to round over that top corner too much. I'm gonna take a little off of it, but I don't want to go dive bombing over like this and screwing up my playing surface. Might look good before you put the strings on.
All right, so I'll go down there and then I'll do the buffing on the tops of the frets and all that stuff with the wet dry sandpaper up to 1500, 2000, and then do my steel wool and get them all nice and shiny. And so I got these kind of beveled in. I got my angle where I want them. I just kind of look straight down at the board and kind of judge if I got them the same way, and they're looking pretty good. So once I get those all in, now I'm just going to do a top level like you would do a fret dress. I'll tape it all off and everything like that and clean it up. It just depends on how much I got to hit it. Usually just like when you're doing a fret dress, I mean, here we don't have to worry about any fret wear or anything like that. But you can take a bar and go across it. You can use your Sharpie on it and stuff like that to see what you're hitting and what you're not. If you got a pretty good light, should be able to see pretty easily. So I just kind of go over it quickly and kind of hit everything a little bit. And hopefully, if I did a good job, I will have scratched the top of the fret from one side to the other, from the very corner of my bevel that I just put in, all the way across the fret, all the way across, and hopefully I don't hit it very much. And as long as I got a little scratch line on each fret going all the way across it, then I'm like, cool, I did a pretty good job of installing them. So now we're buffed and cleaned and went up to 2000 grit and some steel wool and then a little oil and wax, just a little paste wax on there. I like to put on the board at the very end, wipe on, wipe off. But our board looks nice, our frets look good. I don't know if you can see that. But nice and shiny, everything nice and level. So I think we're good to go. Looking pretty straight and flat. So I think our frets are done. Now time to do a nut.